Hello, beautiful friends. I am Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes. And you can learn more about my services at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. But for now, the angels and I are here to help keep you company as you drift off into a good expanse of rest. I have been using sleep podcasts for years, and I love the sense of sanctuary and companionship that I receive from listening to them. And I love them so much that I created this one for you. So welcome. It truly is a blessing to get to spend this time with you. This episode is going to run about an hour. Usually for the first 15 to 20 minutes, I ramble for a bit and I bring in the love of the angels for you. And then I read you a story. This broadcast is infused with love for you. And my hope is that the energy field and the vibration of this transmission assists you in coming into a deeper sense of well-being. You know, as I record this, I am aware of the upheaval that is taking place in the world, and it's been going on for quite some time. And as I've been talking to people over the past week, it seems that many of us are really tired. Not the kind of tired that comes when you're not sleeping well, but more that sense of life fatigue that shows up. You know, and it kind of feels like we're just not in the right gear. So I just wanted to let you know that if you're feeling worn out, if you're not feeling like your brightest self, that you're in really good company. Life has asked a lot of us lately. And so it's one of the reasons that I make this podcast, so that there will be a loving, warm space for you to be nurtured and replenished. There's a vision I often get when I contemplate the energy of this broadcast and the kind of work that I do in the world. If you've ever flown on a plane where the city you're departing is where there's storms and the skies are gray, and then the plane takes off, and after a few minutes you rise above the cloud cover and the skies are blue there. And that's what I want this podcast to be for you. Even though you're falling asleep, maybe the metaphor of the blue sky isn't the best one. Maybe we'll say a starlit sky. It'll be dark. But perhaps where you have departed from, it was cloudy and you couldn't see the moon or the stars. And as soon as you break through the cloud cover, you witness a brilliantly starlit sky. And maybe the moon is bright and it shifts your perspective. So here's to the love and the light of the angels finding you right now, so that you know you're not alone in how you are feeling, so that you know at the deepest level of your being that you matter and that you are a blessing, and that the angels and I are grateful for this time with you. So I invite you to take a deep breath in and let go. And if you are preparing for bed, I invite you to cozy on in and snuggle on up and allow your body to get comfortable. That you have permission to rest. That you have done enough for this moment, for this day. And you are worthy of good rest. You are precious. And you deserve to be loved and supported, especially as you drift off to sleep. So while you're resting into this moment, I'm going to invite the angels in to join us, even though they are already here. And so, beautiful angels on high, we invite you to join us here. And I ask that you infuse this broadcast with waves upon waves of divine love and light that will nurture and support each of the beloveds listening here. Angels, I ask that you clear away anything that does not belong to us, that you lighten any burdens, real or perceived, that you assist each one of us in opening more fully to the bright light that is the truth of our spirit, that we might remember who we are as divine beings in human form. Angels, I ask that you bring forward opportunities of joy, moments of serendipity, adventures that truly delight the spirit. And dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in and allow these waves of love to flow through you. And just let the light come to you. Imagine the room you are in being bathed with a soft pink light that is filled with healing for you. You don't even need to know what's up for healing. Just on the continuum of the human journey, there's always something. And to trust that God and the angels know what is up for healing for you, and they are supporting and helping you right now. So just breathe and let the love soak in to every cell of your body, every thought in your mind, and every emotion in your heart. It's one of those times where I wish I had something really wise to share with you. Often, as an inspirer, beautiful words of wisdom do travel through me. But truly, in this moment, all I have is love, which is a lot. But I don't have a deep spiritual lesson to share with you, other than let's just soak up this love together. I'm in the energetic car wash with you right now. In my blanket fort. For those of you who may not know, I pull a big, thick blanket over my head and the microphone and the monitor when I record this podcast to help dampen the sound. And I will say I've had such a lovely day today. I have facilitated angel sessions and mentoring sessions and a class. And then it was time to record this episode for you. My heart got so happy to pull the blanket up over my head, come into the blanket fort, and plug in the microphone, and have this time with you. And perhaps that's how you're feeling too in this moment. Maybe you have had a chance to pull the blankets up, cozy on up, and feel that sense of cocooning and the love, maybe sheltering a bit from the world outside the blankets. Sometimes we just need a break, Sometimes we just need to lift our feet up off the planet for a little while and reconnect and re-engage with that which is good, that which is light. It's like the leaves of a plant turning towards the sun. It's that part of us that knows that it's time to let go of the intellectual day-to-day 3D world so we can regroup and reset, replenish. So just take a deep breath in and let this moment simply be. Let yourself simply receive. And while you do, I'm going to read you a story. So tonight we're going to return to Anne of Green Gables. This is part 6, and this is by Lucy Maud Montgomery. So if you're new to the story, Anne, with an E, is an orphan girl, and she's adopted by 2 older brothers and sisters, Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. They had hoped to adopt a little boy to help them around the farm, but when they got to the train station to pick up said boy, there was a mix-up and the asylum had sent Anne instead. And Anne is this bright, imaginative, exuberant, emotional girl. She's got long, red, bright hair, and she's very thin, and she talks a mile a minute, and she really entices them to keep her. So a couple of things have happened in the story so far. We're still pretty early on in the book. She has met their neighbor lady, Mrs. Lynde, who can be kind of bossy and get into everybody's business. And she and Anne had an altercation, but they have since resolved their differences. And then Anne had to go to church on Sunday, and Marilla had made her a very plain dress, and Anne decided to fancy up her hat with flowers that she found growing on the path on the way to church. And Mrs. Lynde and Marilla were appalled, and Anne is confused because the flowers are from God and they're beautiful. And Anne is about to meet another little girl, Diana Barry, who lives up the road. And she is hoping upon hope that Diana will be her best bosom friend. Those are the words that Anne uses continually throughout the book. It's such a charming book, truly, and if you haven't heard the other episodes or read it before, it's okay. Just allow yourself to be delighted by the spirit of this little girl, and just we'll go on the adventure together. So I'm going to back up a little bit. So even though I read part of this last time, but we'll just go back to it. Marilla has just told Anne that they're going to go up the road to meet Diana. So Anne rose to her feet with clasped hands, the tears still glistening on her cheeks. The dish towel she had been hemming slipped unheeded to the floor. Oh, Marilla, I am frightened. Now that it has actually come, I am actually frightened. What if she shouldn't like me? It would be the most tragical disappointment of my life. Now, don't get into a fluster, and I do wish you wouldn't use such long words. It sounds so funny in a little girl. I guess Diana will like you well enough. It's her mother you've got to reckon with. If she doesn't like you, it won't matter how much Diana does. If she has heard about your outburst to Mrs. Lynde and going to church with buttercups round your hat, I don't know what she'll think of you. You must be polite and well-behaved, and don't make any of your startling speeches for pity's sake if the child isn't actually trembling. Anne was trembling. Her face was pale and tense. Oh, Marilla, you'd be excited too if you were going to meet a little girl you hoped to be your bosom friend, and whose mother mightn't like you, she said as she hastened to get her hat. They went over to Orchard Slope by the short cut across the brook and up the firry hill grove. Mrs. Barry came to the kitchen door in answer to Marilla's knock. She was a tall, black-eyed, blue-haired woman with a very resolute mouth. She had the reputation of being very strict with her children. "How do you do, Marilla?" she said cordially. "Come in. And this is the little girl you have adopted, I suppose." "Yes, this is Anne Shirley," said Marilla. "Spelled with an E," gasped Anne, who, tremulous and excited as she was determined there should be no misunderstanding on that important point. Mrs. Barry, not hearing nor comprehending, merely shook hands and said kindly, "How are you?" "I am well in body, although considerable rumpled up in spirit. Thank you, ma'am," said Anne gravely. Then aside to Marilla in an audible whisper, "There wasn't anything startling in that, was there, Marilla?" Diana was sitting on the sofa reading a book, which she dropped when the callers entered. She was a very pretty little girl, with her mother's black eyes and hair and rosy cheeks, and the merry expression which was her inheritance from her father. "This is my little girl, Diana," said Mrs. Barry. "Diana, you might take Anne out into the garden and show her your flowers. It will be better for you than straining your eyes over that book, She reads entirely too much, this to Marilla as the little girls went out. And I can't prevent her, for her father aids and abets her. She's always poring over a book. I'm glad she has the prospect of a playmate. Perhaps it will make her more out of doors. Outside in the garden, which was full of mellow sunset light streaming through the old dark firs to the west of it, stood Anne and Diana, gazing bashfully at each other over a clump of gorgeous tiger lilies. The berry garden was a bowery wilderness of flowers which would have delighted Anne's heart at any time less fraught with destiny. It was encircled by a huge old willows and tall firs, beneath which flourished flowers that loved the shade. Prim, right-angled paths neatly bordered with clamshells intersected it, like moist red ribbons, and in the beds between old-fashioned flowers ran riot. There were rosy bleeding hearts and great splendid crimson peonies, white fragrant narcissi, and thorny and sweet Scotch roses, pink and blue and white columbines, and lilac-tinted bouncing bets, clumps of southernwood and ribbon, grass and mint, purple Adam and Eve, daffodils, and masses of sweet clover white with its delicate, fragrant, feathery sprays, scarlet lightning that shot its fiery lances over prim white musk flowers. A garden it was where sunshine lingered and bees hummed, and winds beguiled into loitering purred and rustled. "Oh, Diana," said Anne at last, clasping her hands and speaking almost in a whisper. "Oh, do you think you can like me a little, enough to be my bosom friend?" Diana laughed. Diana always laughed before she spoke. "Why, I guess so," she said frankly. "I am awfully glad you've come to live at Green Gables. It will be jolly to have somebody to play with. There isn't any other girl who lives near enough to play with, and I have no sisters big enough." "Will you swear to be my friend forever and ever?" demanded Anne eagerly. Diana looked shocked. "Why, it's dreadfully wicked to swear," she said rebukingly. "Oh, no, not my kind of swearing. There are two kinds, you know." "I never heard of but one kind," said Diana doubtfully. "There really is another. Oh, it isn't wicked at all. It just means vowing and promising solemnly." "Well, I don't mind doing that," agreed Diana, relieved. "How do you do it?" "We must join hands, so," said Anne gravely. "It ought to be over running water. Well, just imagine this path is running water. I'll repeat the oath first. I solemnly swear to be faithful to my bosom friend Diana Barry as long as the sun and the moon shall endure. Now you say it and put my name in." Diana repeated the oath with a laugh fore and aft. Then she said, "You're a queer girl, Anne." When Marilla and Anne went home, Diana went with them as far as the log bridge. The two little girls walked with their arms around each other. At the brook they parted with many promises to spend the next afternoon together. "Well, did you find, Diana, a kindred spirit?" asked Marilla as they went up through the garden of Green Gables. "Oh, yes," sighed Anne, blissfully unconscious of any sarcasm on Marilla's part. "Oh, Marilla, I'm the happiest girl on Prince Edward Island this very moment. I assure you I'll say my prayers with a right good will tonight. Diana and I are going to build a playhouse in Mr. William Bell's birch grove tomorrow. Can I have those broken pieces of china that are out in the woodshed? Diana's birthday is in February and mine is in March. Don't you think that it's a very strange coincidence? Diana is going to lend me a book to read. She says it's perfectly splendid and tremendously exciting. She's going to show me a place back in the woods where rice lilies grow. Don't you think Diana has got very soulful eyes? I wish I had soulful eyes. Diana is going to teach me to sing a song called Nellie in the Hazel Dell. She's going to give me a picture to put up in my room. It's a perfectly beautiful picture, she says. A lovely lady in a pale blue silk dress. A sewing machine agent gave it to her. I wish I had something to give Diana. I'm an inch taller than Diana, but she is ever so much fatter. She says she'd like to be thin because it's so much more graceful, but I'm afraid she only said it to soothe my feelings. We're going to the shore someday to gather shells. We have agreed to call the spring down by the log bridge the Dryad's Bubble. Isn't that a perfectly elegant name? I read a story once about a spring called that. A dryad is a sort of grown-up fairy, I think. Well, all I hope is you won't talk Diana to death, said Marilla. But remember this in all your planning, Anne. You're not going to play all of the time, nor most of it. You'll have your work to do, and it'll have to be done first. Anne's cup of happiness was full, and Matthew caused it to overflow. He had just gotten home from a trip to the store at Carmody, and he sheepishly produced a small parcel from his pocket and handed it to Anne, with a deprecatory look at Marilla. I heard you say you like chocolate sweeties, so I got you some, he said. Sniffed Marilla. It'll ruin her teeth and stomach. There, child, don't look so dismal. You can eat those since Matthew has gone and gotten them. He'd better have brought you peppermints. They're wholesomer. Don't sicken yourself eating all of them at once now. Oh, no, I won't, said Anne eagerly. I'll just eat one tonight, Marilla, and I can give Diana half of them, can't I? The other half will taste twice as sweet to me if I give some to her. It's delightful to think I have something to give her. I will say it for the child, said Marilla when Anne had gone to her gable. She isn't stingy. I'm glad. For all faults, I detest stinginess in a child. Dear me, it's only 3 weeks since she came, and it seems as if she has always been here. I can't imagine the place without her. Now don't be looking so I told you so, Matthew. That's bad enough in a woman, but it isn't to be endured in a man. I am perfectly willing to own up that I'm glad I consented to keep the child, and that I'm getting fond of her. But don't you rub it in, Matthew Cuthbert. Chapter 13. The Delights of Anticipation. It's time Anne was in to do her sewing, said Marilla, glancing at the clock and then out into the yellow August afternoon, where everything drowsed in the heat. She stayed playing with Diana more than half an hour more than I gave her leave to do so, and now she's perched out there on the woodpile talking to Matthew, 19 to the dozen, when she knows perfectly well she ought to be at her work. And of course he's listening to her like a perfect ninny. I never saw such an infatuated man. The more she talks and the odder the things she says, the more he's delighted, evidently. Anne Shirley, you come right in here this minute. Do you hear me? A series of staccato taps on the west window brought Anne flying in from the yard, eyes shining, cheeks faintly flushed with pink, unbraided hair streaming behind her in her torrent of brightness. "Oh, Marilla," she exclaimed breathlessly, "there's going to be a Sunday school picnic next week in Mr. Harmon Andrews' field, right near the Lake of Shining Waters. And Mrs. Superintendent Bell and Mrs. Rachel Lynde are going to make ice cream. Think of it, Marilla, ice cream. And oh, Marilla, can I go to it?" "Just look at the clock, if you please, Anne. What time did I tell you to come in?" 2:00. But isn't it splendid about the picnic, Marilla? Please, can I go? Oh, I've never been to a picnic. I've dreamed of picnics, but I've never. Yes, I told you to come in at 2:00, and it is 2:45. I'd like to know why you didn't obey me, Anne. Why, I meant to, Marilla, as much as could be. But you have no idea how fascinating Idlewild is. And then, of course, I had to tell Matthew about the picnic. Matthew is such a sympathetic listener. Please, can I go? You'll have to learn to resist the fascination of idle whatever you call it. When I tell you to come in at a certain time, I mean that time, and not half an hour later. And you needn't stop to discourse with sympathetic listeners on your way either. As for the picnic, of course you can go. You're a Sunday school scholar, and it's not likely I'd refuse to let you go when all the other little girls are going. But, faltered Anne, Diana says that everybody must take a basket of things to eat. I can't cook, as you know, Marilla, and I don't mind going to a picnic without puffed sleeves so much, but I'd feel terribly humiliated if I had to go without a basket. It's been preying on my mind ever since Diana told me. Well, it needn't prey any longer. I'll bake you a basket. Oh, you dear good Marilla. Oh, you are so kind to me. Oh, I'm so much obliged to you. Getting through with her ohs, Anne cast herself into Marilla's arms and rapturously kissed her sallow cheek. It was the first time in her whole life that childish lips had voluntarily touched Marilla's face. Again, that sudden sensation of startling sweetness thrilled her. She was secretly vastly pleased at Anne's impulsive caress, which was probably the reason why she said brusquely, There, never mind your kissing nonsense. I'd sooner see you doing strictly as you're told. As for cooking, I mean to begin giving you lessons in that some of these days. But you're so feather-brained, Anne. I've been waiting to see if you'd sober down a little and learn to be steady before I begin. You've got to keep your wits about you in cooking and not stop in the middle of things to let your thoughts rove all over creation. Now get out your patchwork and have your square done before tea time. I do not like patchwork, said Anne dolefully, hunting out her work basket and sitting down before a little heap of red and white diamonds with a sigh. I think some kinds of sewing would be nice, but there's no scope for imagination in patchwork. It's just one little seam after another, and you never seem to be getting anywhere. But of course, I'd rather be Anne of Green Gables sewing patchwork than Anne of any other place with nothing to do but play. I wish time went as quick sewing patches as it does when I'm playing with Diana, though. Oh, we do have such elegant times, Marilla. I have to furnish most of the imagination, but I'm well able to do that. Diana is simply perfect in every other way. You know that little piece of land across the brook that runs up between our farm and Mr. Barry's? It belongs to Mr. William Bell, and right in the corner there is a little ring of white birch trees, the most romantic spot, Marilla. Diana and I have our playhouse there. We call it Idlewild. Isn't that a poetical name? I assure you it took me some time to think it out. I stayed awake nearly a whole night before I invented it. Then, just as I was dropping off to sleep, it came like an inspiration. Diana was enraptured when she heard it. We have got our house fixed up elegantly. You must come see it, Marilla, won't you? We have great big stones all covered with moss for seats, and boards from trees to tree for shelves. And we have all our dishes on them. Of course they're all broken, but it's the easiest thing in the world to imagine that they are whole. There's a piece of plate with a spray of red and yellow ivy on it that is especially beautiful. We keep it in the parlor, and we have the fairy glass there too. The fairy glass is as lovely as a dream. Diana found it out in the woods behind their chicken house. It's all full of rainbows, just little young rainbows that haven't grown big yet. And Diana's mother told her it was broken off a hanging lamp they once had. But it's nice to imagine the fairies lost it one night when they had a ball, so we call it the fairy glass. Matthew is going to make us a table. Oh, and we've named that little round pool over in Mr. Barry's field Willowmere. I got that name out of the book Diana lent me. That was a thrilling book, Marilla. The heroine had 5 lovers. I'd be satisfied with 1, wouldn't you? She was very handsome, and she went through great tribulations. She could faint as easy as anything. I'd love to be able to faint, wouldn't you, Marilla? It's so romantic. But I'm really very healthy, for all I'm so thin. I believe I'm getting fatter, though. Don't you think I am? I look at my elbows every morning when I get up to see if any dimples are coming in. Diana is having a new dress made with elbow sleeves. She's going to wear it to the picnic. Oh, I do hope it will be fine next Wednesday. I don't feel that I could endure the disappointment of anything happened to prevent me from getting to the picnic. I suppose I'd live through it, but I'm certain it would be a lifelong sorrow. It wouldn't matter if I got to 100 picnics in after years. They wouldn't make up for missing this one. They're going to have boats on the Lake of Shining Waters and ice cream, as I told you. I have never tasted ice cream. Diana tried to explain what it was like, but I guess ice cream is one of those things that are beyond imagination. Anne, you have talked even on for 10 minutes by the clock, said Marilla. Now, just for curiosity's sake, see if you can hold your tongue for the same length of time. Anne held her tongue as desired, but for the rest of the week she talked picnic and thought picnic and dreamt picnic. On Saturday it rained, and she worked herself up into such a frantic state lest it should keep on raining until over Wednesday, that Marilla made her sew an extra patchwork square by way of steadying her nerves. On Sunday, Anne confided to Marilla on the way home from church that she grew actually cold all over with excitement when the minister announced the picnic from the pulpit. Such a thrill as went up and down my back, Marilla. I don't think I'd ever really believed until then that there was honestly going to be a picnic. I couldn't help fearing I'd only imagined it. But when a minister says such a thing in the pulpit, you just have to believe it. You set your heart too much on things, Anne, said Marilla with a sigh. I'm afraid there will be a great many disappointments in store for you through your life. "Oh, Marilla, looking forward to things is half the pleasure of them," exclaimed Anne. "You may get the things themselves, but nothing can prevent you from having the fun of looking forward to them. Mrs. Lynde says, 'Blessed are they who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed.' But I think it would be worse to expect nothing than to be disappointed." Marilla wore her amethyst brooch to church that day as usual. Marilla always wore her amethyst brooch to church. She would have thought it rather sacrilegious to leave it off, as bad as forgetting her Bible or her collection time. That amethyst brooch was Marilla's most treasured possession. A seafaring uncle had given it to her mother, who in turn had bequeathed it to Marilla. It was an old-fashioned oval containing a braid of her mother's hair, surrounded by a border of very fine amethysts. Marilla knew too little about precious stones to realize how fine the amethysts actually were, but she thought them very beautiful, and was always pleasantly conscious of their violet shimmer at her throat, above her good brown satin dress, even although she could not see it. Anne had been smitten with delighted admiration when she first saw that brooch. "Oh, Marilla, it's a perfectly elegant brooch. I don't know how you can pay attention to the sermon or the prayers when you have it on. I couldn't, I know. And I think amethysts are just sweet. They are what I used to think diamonds were like, long ago, before I had ever seen a diamond. I read about them and tried to imagine what they would be like. I thought they would be lovely, glimmering purple stones. When I saw a real diamond in a lady's ring one day, I was so disappointed I cried. Of course it was very lovely, but it wasn't my idea of a diamond. Will you let me hold the brooch for 1 minute, Marilla? Do you think amethysts can be the souls of good violets?" Chapter 14. Anne's Confession. On the Monday evening before the picnic, Marilla came down from her room with a troubled face. "Anne," she said to that small personage who was shelling peas by the spotless table and singing Nellie of the Hazel Dell with a vigor and expression that did credit to Diana's teaching, "did you see anything of my amethyst brooch? I thought I stuck it in my pincushion when I came home from church yesterday evening, but I can't find it anywhere." "I saw it this afternoon when you were away at the Aid Society," said Anne a little slowly. "I was passing your door when I saw it on the cushion, so I went in to look at it." "Did you touch it?" said Marilla sternly. "Yes," admitted Anne. "I took it up and I pinned it on my breast just to see how it would look." "You had no business to do anything of the sort. It's very wrong in a little girl to meddle. You shouldn't have gone into my room in the first place, and you shouldn't have touched a brooch that didn't belong to you in the second. Where did you put it?" "Oh, I put it back on the bureau. I hadn't it on a minute, truly. I didn't mean to meddle, Marilla. I didn't think about it being wrong to go in and try on the brooch. But I see now that it was, and I'll never do it again. That's one good thing about me. I never do the same naughty thing twice." "You didn't put it back," said Marilla. "That brooch isn't anywhere on the bureau. You've taken it out or something, Anne." "I did put it back," said Anne. "I don't just remember whether I stuck it on the pincushion or laid it in the china tray, but I am perfectly certain I put it back." "I'll go and have another look," said Marilla, determining to be just. "If you put that brooch back, it's still there. If it isn't, I'll know you didn't, that's all." Marilla went to her room and made a thorough search, not only over the bureau, but in every other place she thought the brooch might be. It was not to be found, and she returned to the kitchen. Anne, the brooch is gone. By your own admission, you are the last person to handle it. Now what have you done with it? Tell me the truth at once. Did you take it out and lose it? No, I didn't, said Anne solemnly, meeting Marilla's angry gaze squarely. I never took the brooch out of your room, and that is the truth. If I was to be led to the block for it, although I'm not very certain what a block is. So there, Marilla. Anne's "so there" was only intended to emphasize her assertion, but Marilla took it as a display of defiance. I believe you are telling me a falsehood, Anne, she said sharply. I know you are. There now, don't say anything more unless you are prepared to tell the whole truth. Go to your room and stay there until you are ready to confess. Will I take the peas with me? Asked Anne meekly. No, I'll finish shelling them myself. Do as I bid you. When Anne had gone, Marilla went about her evening tasks in a very disturbed state of mind. She was worried about her valuable brooch. What if Anne had lost it? And how wicked of the child to deny having taken it when anybody could see she must have, and with such an innocent face, too. I don't know what I wouldn't sooner have had happen, thought Marilla as she nervously shelled the peas. Of course, I don't suppose she meant to steal it or anything like that. She's just taken it to play with or help along that imagination of hers. She must have taken it, that's clear, for there hasn't been a soul in that room since she was up in it, by her own story, until I went up tonight. The brooch is gone, there's nothing surer. I suppose she has lost it and she is afraid to own up for fear that she'll be punished. It's a dreadful thing to think she tells falsehoods. It's a far worse thing than her fit of temper. It's a fearful responsibility to have a child in your house you can't trust. Slyness and untruthfulness, that's what she has displayed. I declare, I feel worse about that than I did about the brooch. If she'd only have told the truth about it, I wouldn't mind so much. Marilla went to her room at intervals all through the evening in searching for the brooch without finding it. A bedtime visit to the east gable produced no result. Anne persisted in denying that she knew anything about the brooch, but Marilla was only the more firmly convinced that she did. She told Matthew the story the next morning. Matthew was confounded and puzzled. He could not quickly lose faith in Anne, but he had to admit that circumstances were against her. You're sure it hasn't fallen down behind the bureau was the only suggestion he could offer. I've moved the bureau and have taken out the drawers, and I've looked in every crack and cranny was Marilla's positive answer. The brooch is gone, and that child has taken it and lied about it. That's the plain ugly truth, Matthew Cuthbert, and we might as well look it in the face. And I thought I would skip us ahead a little bit because I don't like this next part too much, so I'm going to summarize and then I'm going to take you to the end of the chapter. So basically what happens is Marilla is sure that Anne has stolen or taken the brooch, and she tells Anne that she cannot go to the picnic until she confesses or finds the brooch. And Anne wants to go to the picnic more than anything else. So she creates this very impassioned, vivid confession about how she and Diana took the brooch out and they were playing with it and it fell into the river and it was lost forever. And Marilla is horrified, but Anne thinks she can now go to the picnic because she confessed. And Marilla's like, oh no, you cannot go to the picnic. And Anne is beside herself. with sorrow and grief. And so this is where we're going to pick up. So Matthew is advocating for Anne. So he says, "Well, now she's such a little thing," feebly reiterated Matthew. "And there should be allowances made, Marilla. You know she's never had any bringing up." "Well, she's having it now," retorted Marilla. The retort silenced Matthew if it did not convince him. The dinner was a very dismal meal. The only thing cheerful about it was Jerry, the hired boy, and Marilla resented his cheerfulness as a personal insult. When her dishes were washed and her bread sponge set and her hens fed, Marilla remembered that she had noticed a small rent in her best black lace shawl when she had taken it off on Monday afternoon on returning from the Ladies' Aid. She would go and mend it. The shawl was in a box in her trunk. As Marilla lifted it out, the sunlight falling through the vines that clustered thickly about the window struck upon something caught in the shawl. Something that glittered and sparkled in facets of violet light. Marilla snatched at it with a gasp. It was the amethyst brooch hanging to a thread of the lace by its catch. "Dear life and heart," said Marilla blankly, "what does this mean? Here is my brooch safe and sound that I thought was at the bottom of Barry's pond. Whatever did that girl mean by saying she took it and lost it? I declare I believe Green Gables is bewitched. I remember now that when I took off my shawl Monday afternoon, I laid it on the bureau for a minute. I suppose the brooch got caught in it somehow. Well," Marilla betook herself to the east gable, brooch in hand. Anne had cried herself out and was sitting dejectedly by the window. "Anne Shirley," said Marilla solemnly, "I have just found my brooch hanging to my black lace shawl. Now I want to know what that rigmarole you told me this morning meant." "Why, you said you'd keep me here until I confessed," returned Anne wearily. "And so I decided to confess because I was bound to get to the picnic. I thought out a confession last night after I went to bed and made it as interesting as I could. And I said it over and over so that I wouldn't forget it. But you wouldn't let me go to the picnic after all, so all my trouble was wasted." Marilla had to laugh in spite of herself, but her conscience pricked her. "Anne, you do beat all. But I was wrong. I see that now. I shouldn't have doubted your word when I'd never known you to tell a story. Of course it wasn't right for you to confess to a thing you hadn't done. It was very wrong to do so, but I drove you to it. So if you'll forgive me, Anne, I'll forgive you and we'll start square again. And now get yourself ready for the picnic." Anne flew up like a rocket. "Oh, Marilla, isn't it too late?" "No, it's only 2:00. They won't be more than well gathered yet, and it'll be an hour before they have tea. Wash your face and comb your hair and put on your gingham. I'll fill a basket for you. There's plenty of baked stuff in the house, and I'll get Jerry to hitch up the sorrel and drive you down to the picnic ground." "Oh, Marilla," exclaimed Anne, flying to the washstand. "5 minutes ago I was so miserable I was wishing I'd never been born, and now I wouldn't change places with an angel." That night, a thoroughly happy, completely tired out Anne returned to Green Gables in a state of beatification impossible to describe. "Oh, Marilla, I have had a perfectly scrumptious time. Scrumptious is a new word I learned today. I heard Mary Alice Bell use it. Isn't it very expressive? Everything was lovely. We had a splendid tea, and then Mr. Harmon Andrews took us all for a row on the lake of shining waters, 6 of us at a time. And Jane Andrews nearly fell overboard. She was leaning out to pick water lilies, and if Mr. Andrews hadn't caught her by her sash just in the nick of time, she'd fallen in and probably drowned. I wish it had been me. It would have been such a romantic experience to have been nearly drowned. It would be such a thrilling tale to tell. And we had the ice cream. Words fail me to describe that ice cream, Marilla. I assure you it was sublime. That evening, Marilla told the whole story to Matthew over her stocking basket. I am willing to own up that I made a mistake, she concluded candidly, but I've learned a lesson. I have to laugh when I think of Anne's confession, although I suppose I shouldn't, for it really was a falsehood. But it doesn't seem as bad as the other would have been, somehow, and anyhow, I'm responsible for it. The child is hard to understand in some respects, but I believe she'll turn out all right. And there's one thing certain, no house will ever be dull that she's in. And that, my friends, is where we are going to stop the story for right now, but I promise we will come back to Anne. And I also don't know if you can hear the white noise in the recording, but if you've noticed a little shift, it's because the air conditioning went on in the midst of this part of the recording, and it's really hot outside, and I can't turn off the air and be under the blanket fort, so forgive me for the ambient hum of our air conditioner, but hopefully you're asleep right now and you haven't even noticed it. So I wish you sweet dreams. I wish you a blessed rest. I am deeply grateful for you. I love you. And I look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you.